Hello and welcome to a MisBeee Writes podcast. This month I speak to Onyeka, author of Blackamoores, Africans in Tudor England, Their Presence, Status and Origins. Onyeka's research spans decades, during which time he has gathered evidence to dispel the widely held belief that Africans only came to Britain as slaves. He talks to MisBeee about the free noble men and women and skilled artisans from across the African continent who were critical in shaping modern Britain.
You know, there's a strange kind of contradiction that we find in English literature and English historian, where for most of the white characters in Shakespeare, they spend so much time trying to find the historical accuracy of the characters. They say, well, what's Henry V really like, the character that we see? Was Richard III really like the Richard III that we see? Let's find his bones, let's dig up his bones. Was he really a hunchback, like describe? Who was the Falstaff in Henry IV? Was he really the same John Oldcastle that's talked about in English history? Who were the kinds of people that are mentioned in these plays? Are they real people? Are they based on real people? And who was Shakespeare himself? They're fascinated by these things, and yet, in a contradictory way, when we get the African characters, like Othello in Othello, or Aaron in Titus Andronicus, or the Moorish ambassador in The Merchant of Venice, or Caliban, who's also of African descent. His mother is Sycorax, the witch from North Africa, in The Tempest. So we get these four characters, and he says, no, where's the historical research to find out if they're real people? No, instead these four characters get relegated to the discussion of the other, and there's a whole thing in English literature and historiography about the other, and the other is a kind of thing, a place where English teachers and historians place black people in Renaissance, and they say, well, obviously they didn't know these people, they were just others, they imagined them, but then these are complex and interesting characters. These aren't just pastiches. These aren't just in the subtext. These are in the foreground. These are in the front. They're complex characters. Why don't we do the same investigation with them that you did with the white characters? Isn't that a double standard? And yet there isn't that kind of research, because there's not only skills, but there's resources that you need to do that research. So Othello and Aaron and the Moorish ambassador are based on people from 16th century Europe and based in 16th century England. They represent an African presence, even though Aaron is actually set in the play Titus Andronicus, and Titus Andronicus is set in the Roman period. It's not about the Roman period, it's about Renaissance Italy. So these characters represent 16th century African presence, predominantly men, and there are a number of things which these characters share. The first thing is that they are seeking or involved in a relationship with a white woman. Number two, these are men of standing and somewhat status, and also they have no equal in their society, and also they have power and authority, right? Othello is a more complex person in that he has certain contradictions of insecurities borne out by his experiences. He does suffer something akin to a kind of racial agenda, but it's not a racial agenda that stops him from rising to the top position within Venetian society, but it is a kind of racial agenda that's left a scar on his mind. But Othello is defeated by Othello, not by Iago. He doubts himself, and he doubts that Desdemona can be his woman, and he doubts that such a relationship could maintain itself, and he doubts whether he should be in that relationship and whether he should be in that position, and then he doubts whether Desdemona has been true, because he doubts himself. So his problem is doubting himself, not necessarily because the society doubts him, but because he doubts himself. So that's a different kind of story from the one that's usually portrayed to us. So this kind of subtlety of inflection suggests that the writers knows African people, because these are complex characters. They're not just pastiches. And we know for a fact, for example, that in London, when Shakespeare and Marlowe and Thomas Dekker and these other English writers are writing what they write, we know that Africans lived in London and these other cities and places where they lived. Therefore, it's not surprising that they would talk about Africa, since Africans are present inside the places where they are writing their books and where they are and they see them every day. Of course, there is the legend of a Lucy Negro, and this Lucy Negro is apparently someone who had a sexual relation with the writer William Shakespeare when he came from Stratford upon Avon, and either gave her a sexual disease or she got one. Either way, there was something that happened there, and she was probably a woman of loose repute, operating from the Swan public house near Liverpool Street in a notorious area, in one of those stews, what they call stews, and was probably a blackbird, as they called them, or called them later on, a blackbird, being that she was a bird but also black. So there may have been a relationship with this black woman, and she might have been the inspiration for the sonnets 139 to 152. It's called the Dark Lady Sonnet, or the Dark Sonnets, which talk about references to blackness and black woman and this and that, and forbidden relationships and all the rest of it. Although people say, they try and hypothesize and say that it's got nothing to do with her. It's highly likely that it is to do with her.
Why do you think it's highly likely?
Because there are references to her blackness, and in the old age black was not counted fair, but blackness is fairness in my place, all these different things that Shakespeare keeps saying, and to her womanhood, and also to the fact of it being forbidden, not necessarily because of the blackness, but because of her social status and social standing.
But could it have not been any other black? Why Lucy Negro?
Well, because we know about Lucy. It could be another one, but we know about Lucy. We know her because we know she's referenced in the English records. So it may have been a number of black women. But we know about Lucy.